I think you guys all know who Dr. Vickers is. He's a professor here of New Testament. I've been teaching here long time and a good friend. And I always like talking this subject with him because I think I remember when I was an MDiv student, I was in your shepherding group, and these types of things would come up in our one-on-one discussions because
I think
everybody left.
you were my shepherding group.
It was just me and you. It was everybody left us. So yeah. So as we kind of talk, how do you be a good online student? Studying and stuff. Dr. Vickers, what do you see that students struggle the most with, whether it's on campus or online? Because a lot of the things we're saying, it doesn't matter if you're studying from a distance or studying here on campus. Everyone is kind of dealing with the same issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. Yeah, and you're right. I don't think there's a distinction between online and on campus. There is, except for in one way. So a typical online student maybe isn't taking as many courses at once, but you're taking it at lightning speed in 8 weeks, right? And so that does make a difference. And you're doing online presumably because you're also doing things like working full time. I mean, we have on-campus students who work full time too. I'm not saying anything bad about them. So, your time is limited. I think it's really common. I talk about this sometimes in the live syncs and hermeneutics. It's really common to feel like there is no way I can retain all of this information. And the reason I know it is because I'm like 3 weeks in, I'm already not retaining all this information, and there's 5 more weeks to go. And then you get near the end of a class, you're like, I feel like I took that class and now I need to retake it in order to actually learn the material that was kind of thrown at me in 8 weeks, right? I think that's a common thing that some version of that, but that's common to all students. And I can understand why, right? It's based in a practical reason and a legitimate. They're both, like, the practical thing is I got to know this stuff for like an exam, right? So on one level, there's no question about whether I need to know it, but I think for almost all students beyond that, there's a knowledge that I came to seminary in order to train for some sort of ministry in some sort of way. This is not just sort of information that I'm gaining along the way. This is vital stuff, right? I mean, I'm taking personal counseling. I'm taking hermeneutics, right? I'm taking Old Testament. I'm taking systematic theology. It's all flying at me, and I can't keep it all in. Well, the good news from me is you're exactly right. Your assessment is correct. You can't keep it all in. And I think sometimes that we have it's understandable. I was the same way. I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the fact that what's basically happening is not sort of the mastery of every single topic at the moment, right? And then when you're done, you're like a master of introduction to systematics or something, right? The whole goal is to introduce you in rather fire hydrant kind of ways to the whole breadth of the theological disciplines, without the expectation that you're going to retain every single thing. And the other thing is this: it's easy to feel. I've got hermeneutics here, I've got systematics here, I've got church history down here, I've got counseling there. I know all these things go together, but I can't fit them together. Well, one of the goals, if not the goal of education, is a long-term goal, and that's a goal of synthesis, where things do in fact come together. But the fact is you have to be patient and wait for that to happen. And the way you accomplish that is not to think, oh my gosh, I've got to get all these things together. Oh, I can't remember what was in that class. I got this class. Is to really kind of think, God has given me one job to do right now, and it is to take this systematic theology class, and that's what I'm going to do. And, to sort of exercise a lot of patience and because a lot of anxiety can build up, I think. But I always tell my students, look, that is the most normal way a seminary student feels. Overwhelmed, too much information. I can't connect it all. I got to connect all this. one of the keys to becoming a good seminary student is learning how to live with that. And that there's no real easy fix. It's like, it's a long-term sort of thing. And even when you get out of seminary, the thing is now you've been sort of exposed to lots of different tools, right? You might not have them in a second, but you've been exposed to you have all these tools that you've picked up that you then can use. And it's really when you start applying the various things in ministry, whatever that ministry might be, that's when the things start coming together, right? It's like for instance, the first time you ever get asked to teach a book of the Bible, you will 1,000%, no matter how much prep you do, you will 1,000% at the end of that class think, I never knew so much about Ephesians or whatever until I taught it. Same sort of thing, right? And hopefully that's good news for you. You just kind of have to learn to live with it. There's a word for it, and the word is called distantiation. Now, you're in a bad condition when it sounds like somebody has to make up a word to describe the condition you're in, right? But it's this idea that you have all these things swirling around, how vital it is that you put them together. It's just, you're not yet at a place where that can actually happen. And you learn to live, honestly, the easy way is you learn to live by faith and not by sight. And you apply the principle of living by faith and not by sight every day to your studies. That's the long answer. I'll make my other answers shorter.
That was a great answer. I think, back from my time doing MDiv and, getting opportunities to teach other things, I realized, while like you said, while I didn't remember every specific thing, I realized when I was preparing to teach or lead a Bible study or a small group, that I was already miles ahead because I had those classes, and stuff would start to come together as I was prepping. I was already way ahead than if I hadn't taken that stuff. And, it's encouraging to look back, when that happens and the things I learned in hermeneutics that winter term when I first started, that actually did stick in some way. I just didn't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not different than if you went to trade school to say, learn to work on cars. I grew up in an auto shop. So it's one thing to learn sort of in the environment of a trade shop, right? I mean, in trade school, where you're kind of working on specific sorts of things. You're learning the rudiments, right? But you can't remember, there's a billion car parts and there's a billion computers. The first day you're on your job and all of a sudden you're confronted with this car that seems to have all the problems at once, none of which seem to be anything that you ever studied in trade school, right? So in other words, that's when you start to bring all those things together. But it's not because you left trade school with at the level of a master mechanic. So anyway, that's enough analogies.
That's good. So Eric brought up that their group kind of discussed, having difficulty in the writing process. So, I shared when I came to seminary, I was an accounting undergrad. I was used to putting everything in bullet points or charts. And so coming to seminary and actually having to write a paper was very difficult. And I think Eric had a similar experience, but everybody's coming from different writing skill backgrounds. How do you, besides the answer, which I know you're going to give, is just write and keep writing, how do you kind of begin to form that as a seminary student? Not necessarily getting better, just putting words on a paper that seem coherent.
Yeah. Okay. Number one goal, number one step. Look at your syllabus day one or before day one and figure out what your assignments are and make this sort of covenant with yourself. No. Don't make a covenant yet with yourself because you'll break it. Number one, look at that and say to yourself with all seriousness, there is no way for me to do a good job on that writing assignment if I start 2 days before it's due. If I start 2 days before it's due, I shouldn't be surprised that I turn in a horrible paper and that my life is miserable and that I basically am a horrible person to be around because I haven't slept for 48 hours. When in fact, I've known about this assignment for 9 weeks, but now I've decided to wait till 24 hours before it's due. and all kinds of bad knock-on effects are now taking place for all the people around me. So that's the sort of the first step is, right? Love your neighbor as yourself by looking at your syllabus and thinking, how do I keep from detaching myself from reality for 48 hours, right? Because you can't really write. Now let's get to the practical things. Number one, you do want to have obviously you want to know what the assignment is, right? Have a good idea. There's lots of different writing assignments. So I'm going to try to just answer in a generic kind of way. Let's pretend it's some sort of research thing, right? You might have to, let's say it's a small research project where you have to include, this is random, say 5 sources or something, okay? Number one, decide for yourself ahead of time, one of those sources is not going to be a study Bible. Number two, one of those sources is not going to be some random website somewhere, right? You're going to try to actually use legit sources. Not saying there's nothing good on websites, but I think you know what I'm talking about. The other thing is this. The next thing is this, is you want to start your research, but don't get the idea that I have to research. And at the very end of my research, I'm going to try to pile in all the writing. You need to learn the discipline of you start writing before you feel like you've done all of your research. There's no law that says I've got to make sure I've done all my research and then I just sort of sit in my books here, maybe with Post-it notes in them or something. I write a sentence, look up a, this is a horrible way to write. I write a sentence and here's a quote, I'll put that in there. Write another sentence, here's a quote, I'll put that in there. And now I just did a footnote that took me 40 minutes to do that footnote right and get all the style guide issues taken care of. Now I'm out of time. I've written less than a paragraph and that's it. I'll redo that. So what you want to do is you want to learn to write. Number one, you have to think about drafts with a plural. The first draft should be it's okay if the first draft is absolutely horrible. The idea is you're getting something on the page that gets sort of the writing process started, significant, and ideally, before 2 days before it's due. And that's one of the ways. So you're just getting something on the paper, on the page, on the computer, right? That gets it started. That's one of the first steps. The second step is this: while you're doing that, before you get, you're just sort of getting your ideas out there. That's one thing I always do is I just write a whole bunch of stuff. It turns out mostly to be garbage. But there might be something in there, but the good news is if I have garbage stuff to say, I've already said I can throw it away, not pay, I won't say it again. But the other thing is learn the discipline of writing from a carefully devised outline. I can't stress this enough. You need to know I'm starting here. I'm going to have 3 headings, whatever, and then a new section. There's going to be 2 headings and a new section, and then the conclusion, pretend, right? You need to know where you're going from where you started. Typically, papers are like stream of consciousness. And the reason I know they are is because lots of papers start out pretty well. Lots of papers, you get an introduction. It's like, okay, I'm sort of getting to the point here. And then you get like a pretty strong section, and then a not as strong section, and then a not as strong section. And then it just sort of like tails off at the end. There's really no conclusion. It's just like some devotional thoughts that are thrown in there at the end that were maybe done at 3 a.m. Or if you did the night shift, maybe they were done at 10 a.m. It's really important for you to know I'm starting at this place, I'm ending at this place, knowing that you can tweak that along the way. Now, it might seem like I don't have time to make an outline, but the thing is this is all predicated, by the way, on not starting like 2 days before it's due. If you have an outline, your paper will be as strong at the beginning as it is at the end. The other thing is this: you won't have things where you just sort of shoot off, right? Because something distracted you. That's it. I can't stress that enough. The last thing I'll say, and then if you want to ask a question, I like to separate my writing from my technical work of filling in all my footnotes. I don't like to do those at the same time. If it's mid-morning and I have a day where it's dedicated to writing, I promise you, I'm not putting any footnotes in there. I'm going to write and I'll make a little note to myself. Sometimes it'll just be like a footnote. I just maybe change the color and maybe not even a footnote. It's like, I saw this somewhere. I think it was in Shriner, right? That's all I need. And I'm going to keep right on going. And then I'm going to come back in later and fill in the footnotes because I can be barely sentient and fill in a footnote. I need, like, honestly, I don't need anything happening mentally hardly at all to fill in a footnote. Right? I mean, I can be half asleep and because it's just, it's just technical work. I don't want to use my writing time to fill in footnotes. The other thing is this, is if you're doing a sentence footnote, okay, it's like sentence, fill that in, footnote. What you're going to end up with is a paragraph that's a collection of sentences that don't sort of go together. And so you learn to take these steps, right? You start getting something on the page, get your ideas out there. It's really important. You create an outline and you follow your outline. And then this is just a personal preference. I think it's a good idea that if you don't have to fill in all your, if you just have some Saturday afternoon where you're kind of tired and you're not feeling completely all together mentally, that's a great time to put in footnotes, right? Because you already don't feel great anyway. So you may as well do something that's not great to do, right? And so filling in footnotes, right? You don't have to be, you don't have to be like super happy while you're doing that. You're like, okay, this is part of it. I'm just going to do it now. And, I can fill in footnotes with almost anything going on around me in life and still get those footnotes, but I can't write well, in it maybe 2 a.m., but I could put footnotes in. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. When I was going through my MDiv, I realized, after a couple of classes that like most of the papers that I was needing to do pretty much gave me the outline I needed to do. Like I wasn't having to come up with something like really fresh and unique. It was like, hey, you have these like topics and here's what you need to, write on and research. And being able to kind of fill in those outlines, I realized I didn't have to like come up with something like radical and unique. I just needed to basically answer the question in a research paper form. When I was
if you can just get something down, and the great thing about not starting too late is, you start to learn the benefit of just honestly like a nonsense first draft where you can just get stuff out there. But as long as you can, the other thing is that this requires though, that you have to, there's been some of my PhD students where I've said, I'm going to come to your house and take your backspace key off your computer because you're like 5 words forward. Oh, wait, this is the wrong preposition. But backwards. Oh, this is the wrong word. But backwards. And so it's like writing like this. And I'm like, you got to get rid of that stupid backspace key. And if you're thinking about writing in drafts, you can fix it. But you don't want to be, the thing is when you're writing that way, you're conceiving of what you're writing at the moment as the final draft, but it isn't. And if you can kind of free yourself from, I'm constantly writing the final draft, you will actually end up with a better final draft. And the last thing I didn't mention, proofread. And if you can read it out loud to yourself, that is the best way to do it. Because then you will hear all those sentences that I'll be reading, like, I don't know what this means. And that's a really easy thing to do. And it's really easy, a way to guarantee that you will not impress your OTA or your prof is to have a paper filled with typos. Nothing says I didn't put much effort into this other than like a whole bunch of typos that clearly aren't all bad sort of autocorrect things.